fabrics in your stash that you're just too scared to cut into. In this episode, I talk with Stephanie Canada, vintage sewing pattern and fabric seller, about when and why it's okay to use the precious fabric. Plus, she shares her sourcing secrets and tells us when it's important to chuck vintage sewing resources in the bin. This is the second of 2 episodes with Stephanie, so if you haven't heard last week's, then pop this one on pause and go and listen to the first one. But if you have already heard part 1 of this conversation, then stick around a couple of minutes for part 2. Welcome to Check Your Thread, the podcast that will help you sew more sustainably. My name's Zoe and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 15 years and I'm the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But, like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis, and I'm looking at the way that my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes, whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. And I really hope you'll join me in this journey. Hello, wonderful listener. How are you doing today? I'm taking a break from organising my kids' bedroom to come and record this, and I'm grateful for a break from all the dust. As I'm sure many of you know, it is like a constant uphill struggle to try and help my kids keep on top of their stuff. But my daughter and I have got into watching this TV show called Sort Your Life Out. And she's been far more amenable to having a bit of a declutter and getting rid of some stuff she no longer uses after watching that show. So how's your sewing going at the moment? Since the last episode, I finished up the pinafore that I was making with the leopard print twill that I got on my honeymoon. And it looks super cute. I'm hoping that fabric is going to soften up a little bit after a few washes and wears. But beyond that, I'm really pleased with it. And by more luck than judgment, it's got really wide seam allowances at the side seams. So it's definitely future-proofed for future body changes. Next on the sewing table are some items required for my kids for World Book Day. But I'll talk about that a bit more next week. So if you are trying to rustle up some DIY World Book Day costumes at the moment as well, sending thoughts and prayers. Right, I have a sustainability win to tell you that has been in the works for a while. To be honest, it's not complete yet, but I've done the hardest bit, so I'm going to share it with you. I have finally managed to break up with my old bank. So, since I was 16, I've had a bank account with HSBC, which used to be called the Midland Bank. Do you remember that, British listeners? Anyway, I received a nudge via an Instagram post by a previous guest, Jane Gale, who just switched her bank account. It's been on my radar as something that I could do for years, but it always just seemed like a really tough thing to do, you know. Anyway, I used the website bank.green and looked into HSBC. So, turns out that they are the second worst bank in the UK for funding fossil fuel initiatives. No, thank you. Well, that's not where I want my money to go. So after a bit more research on the bank.green site, I decided to open up an account with Triodos, but there's loads of other ones that are actually really good. Anyway, Triodos absolutely do not use their customers' money to fund fossil fuels, and instead they invest in all sorts of green initiatives. So I'm using their switching service, which makes things very easy, and by the end of this week, my current account should be entirely switched over. I still have a tiny ISA with HSBC that I need to deal with, but I'll get to that next. Okay, sustainability fails. That would probably be the amount of little plastic pieces of broken tat that are not recyclable that are having to go in the bin after this decluttering my kids' room. And yes, we still haven't redistributed the small electricals or the books that we cleared out the last 2 rounds of decluttering we've been doing. They're all still in our hallway. Okay, so I get to say a big thanks this week to new patrons, Gina, Suzanne, Linda, Lynn and Beth. They have all signed up to support the podcast in the last 7 days. And big thanks to existing patrons, Helen, Naomi, Stacey, Norma and Sheila for upping the amount of their support. I honestly could not make this podcast without the patrons, so I am so grateful. I'm really committed to keeping this podcast ad-free. I never want you to think, is she talking about this or that because she's being sponsored? Or does she honestly think that they're good? Plus, let's be honest, a lot of the chat that goes on around here is about buying less, which is not typically a message that businesses want to hear. So sponsorship wouldn't be a good fit for this podcast on many levels. But with no sweet ad money keeping things afloat, It falls to the epic patrons of this podcast and the odd sale I get from my tiny collection of downloadable resources to help make ends meet whilst I work away at making these weekly episodes. So thank you, patrons. And I'm so happy to be able to offer more of a community vibe to the podcast patrons these days. We've got our 2 monthly mending meetups that take place on Zoom, and we've got some community chats going on via the Patreon app. So it's so great to be able to all inspire and learn from each other. So if you want a piece of Check Your Thread Patreon community action, you can sign up for any amount that makes sense to you. So it is super inclusive. Find the link via the show notes in your podcast app or on the website checkyourthread.com. Okay, today's episode. If you loved last week's half of the conversation with Stephanie Canada, it kind of goes without saying that you'll love this half too. We get to hear more inside secrets about her business, and we'll get into that very emotive topic about whether or not to cut into precious fabric. So even if your fabric collection isn't vintage as such, I'm sure that these are feelings that you'll be able to relate to. In short, this is going to be a lot of fun. So until next week, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Use your voice to call for a ceasefire now, and enjoy. So let's get onto your business. Like, how did Backroom Finds begin? Was that the seed, the hat box in the thrift store?
Yeah, it was. It really was. That was the one. And it was funny because I found it in their back room. That's where the name, people are like, why in the world would you pick that? I'm like, because people have back rooms. And that's where I go find stuff. I don't look on the front store. The number of antique stores that just let me in their back room.
Really?
I don't know if it's the round face. I don't know if it's the friendly Midwestern demeanor. But by God, so many people will let me just like in their back room for no apparent reason. Yeah. So that's where that came from, was because I found it in the back room and I was like, that's a fun little name. It doesn't really scream sewing store in a time where I could have probably had like some of the best, punniest sewing store names.
Yeah. You weren't thinking about SEO at the time, were you?
No. I was just thinking like, that's exactly where I found that. That's a cute name. Period. End of story. There's my store name.
So it was finding the patterns. Was it an Etsy shop?
It was an Etsy shop. Yes, it was an Etsy shop for a very long time, actually, which makes me sad with where Etsy has now taken themselves.
And it's very hard to make a profit now, isn't it?
It's almost impossible to make a profit. I can't even look for patterns anymore on there to like see if other people have it, because unless I search exactly a really broken way that makes absolutely no sense. It's really frustrating. But yes, it started on Etsy, and originally I was just losing money. I wasn't doing great. I was spending more than I was bringing in. And honestly, that was how it was for a very long time. Like, I'm still sort of surprised that I'm here. But I want to say, I think it was right before the pandemic started. Yeah, it was the end of 2019 when I went, Stephanie, you are paying more to Etsy in fees per month than you are making from them. I had thousands of patterns on that website. I was paying them hundreds of dollars every month just to renew these things that weren't getting seen anymore. There was a time I did really well, but they weren't being seen anymore. They weren't selling because no one knew I existed. Even if they had favorited my shop, they wouldn't get the notifications back then. So I said, screw this. Let's look and see what website would be best for my business. And there's how Shopify happened. And so now I'm on Shopify, and in 2019, I made the world's dumbest mistake. So if you are thinking of opening a Shopify store, listen to me and listen to me well. If you sell a physical product and you import from your Etsy and you have a huge .crv file that has all the quantities of what you have, especially if you're vintage like me, so you definitely only have one of that very rare pattern. When it asks you, do you want to track your inventory in Shopify? You click that yes button. You click that yes button so hard it bleeds. Because I did not. Oh. I imported well over 1,800 patterns at the time, and I did not track whether or not I had them in inventory.
Oh, so every time something got sold, you'd have to trawl through it all to find the listing and delete the listing. Oh.
And there was a long time there where I was double selling patterns. And I forget when it was. It was sometime during the pandemic when I had all the time in the world. I was like, I'm done with this. We're fixing this. So my husband and I sat down one day. He was on the computer and I was in the drawer, and we went pattern by freaking pattern to make sure the inventory was correct. Yeah, so if you are looking to start a Shopify and you have physical products, you make sure you track that inventory and you track it well. And also charge sales tax. There's a button for that now too, which is very helpful.
Okay, right. Good
Yes.
lessons.
Yes, those are my Shopify tips of how to not waste, and it took 2 weeks. And now here's the thing, like if I did mystically double sell something still,
Yeah.
like also be a good business owner, contact the person, tell them you're so sorry, you don't have it in stock, offer them a discount to a different product. Usually what I do, like if somebody does manage to find one, which it's very rare now, thank God. But like there's still occasions where like maybe I sold it on PayPal and I forgot to like drop it out. Or maybe it is one of the rare times the expensive one sells on Etsy, which is not very often. But so like what you do is you go through to try and fix it with the customer. So you go through, you apologize. I always do like, hey, your pattern was worth $15. Would you like to go pick a pattern for up to $30 from my website and in place of it, like as my apology? Because like, it's not going to hurt you to keep the customer like that.
Absolutely, because otherwise they're not going to come back, are they?
Right. By setting up that failure at the beginning, then you fix the failure by how you make it right.
Absolutely. And then when they're talking to their vintage loving friend, and they're not going to be like, they could be like, oh, it was really frustrating, but you know what? She was amazing about it. Yeah. Rather than like, I will never touch that site again, and neither should you.
Yeah.
Because it's a scene, isn't it? If you're a part of a scene, like that's going to get around, isn't it?
And there are people that are like, why don't you go to the bigger fairs? I'm like, do you know how hard it is to haul sewing patterns?
They're pretty heavy.
Also, like the easiest way to look at them is in a drawer. And I am not about to lug one of those bad boys full of patterns to a vintage fair for 5 hours. No.
Yeah. And then sit there at the end having to take off everything from your website that you sold at the vintage fair.
No. Although the one thing I will say, the nice thing about Shopify, if you do those and you sell on Shopify, they actually have now a sell in person link.
Oh, right.
So that you don't have to go back through. You can pull up your website and slide their card and do it all through Shopify, like through your actual website, and it will take it out of your inventory. So like it's actually, there is a nicer way. Thankfully, Shopify did figure that out. So 2 thumbs up. Thanks Shopify for that.
So how do you source your inventory?
Well, I'll tell you how I used to source it.
Okay.
Versus how I currently source it. I used to be the eBay troll. Not the sniper. Good.
I hate sniper.
I'm not gonna lie. I would occasionally wait till the last minute to throw a gigantic bid if it had stuff I really, really wanted. But that was rare. Usually, like I'm the kind where I'm like, I find it early and I put my max. And if somebody goes over it, okay, go with God. It just wasn't meant for me.
So is that like you're looking at lots at this point? You're not looking at individual patterns?
So what I would do is, because I am on the East Coast in the US, so I would wait until about 2, because also I worked in theater, so I was awake till 2 in the morning.
Right.
So I would wait till 2:30 until California had done their last round or whatever. I would go through and search vintage pattern lot, the most broad, wide blanket I could throw, and I would do most recent. Right. Because you would be surprised how many people toss on amazing pattern lots for 10, 20, $30. Buy it now. Not auction. They would just put buy it now for $30. Be like, oh, mine. And that's how I used to do it.
Yeah.
So I would just wait until the God's Green Creation hour o'clock on the East Coast, which was a vaguely normal hour on the West Coast, so that people had been basically done listing for the day. Because I don't have time during the day to look at it, but I do have time at night. So that's how I used to do it. I would do that, and then I would do occasional, believe it or not, Craigslist still. Occasionally really? You can find things. Yeah. You have to be careful. So meet at a police station, meet at a public, make it a grocery store. Be real obvious about where you're meeting. Don't ever meet anyone at their house. Don't ever meet anyone at a park by itself. Absolutely not. 0 out of 10. Do not do that. Public meeting places. My favorite Craigslist find, it was actually, I think, 2016. And then I did everything you shouldn't do. This lady had a suitcase full of glorious early 1940s patterns.
Wow.
They were so amazing, and they had been saved from the attic by the suitcase, because the suitcase was leather, And so the bugs had eaten the leather suitcase and not the patterns, because the leather was more tasty. I was like, yes, thank you, God.
No.
I mean, some of them still had damage, but it wasn't too bad. But we met in the dark at her house, and I went inside while my husband and kid were in the car. It was like literally the world's stupidest idea and really great ways to die. Don't do that. But like I said, like occasionally you can still find stuff on Craigslist. Facebook Marketplace also used to be one of my favorite places. Again, they have been messing with it, so it's hit or miss now. And also just the popularity and visibility of how Facebook Marketplace runs now versus how it used to run, which when it was all like really local stuff and you had to really try hard to go to a different area. Whereas now people can make them, you know, worldwide, and they'll ship and all of this. So it's made it a little bit...
it's at eBay now, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, except worse. I would still say go search on eBay before go to Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah, I have to say, at least eBay you can search for stuff fairly well, can't you?
Yes, not so much on Facebook Marketplace. And then I will say estate sales were really good. In Florida, they're hit or miss. Sometimes you'll occasionally come across like the really amazing estate sale, but you have to find the people that have literally lived here their entire lives. And those in Florida are hard to find. Because what you usually find are the snowbirds who are coming down after they've sold their real home in Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York, wherever.
Yeah, they've already downsized.
Yes. And so all they're going to bring is the sewing machine that doesn't work anymore because it's pretty in the corner. Yeah, so the estate sales in other areas where people really live, do it all the time. Estatesales.net, save that, bookmark it. That is your jam. I will occasionally, before I did this last lot, like I would actually look for nationwide sales that were big enough to include sewing. And like there was one I actually happened to be at the time in, we were in Portland recently, and there was a huge one. It was gigantic, and there was sewing stuff. Now, it wasn't great sewing stuff, but there was sewing stuff. But that's how I used to source. So like if you are just getting started, if you want to, you know, go find pattern lots of your own and have the mystery of is it complete, you know, that's how I would do it. Now, bless my dear community on YouTube, I have to tell them to not send me things.
Oh, wow, really?
They are so kind and they are so generous. The number of boxes that I have just gotten in my P.O. box that I had no clue were coming, and they will always be filled with patterns.
Oh, wow.
So I don't actually need to source anymore because my community is so absolutely wonderful. Now, do I still occasionally? Yes. So a little while back, I got contacted and have launched a video showing how I got literally one of the biggest hauls of my entire career. The fabric, the patterns, the trim, the sewing feet, the velvet lace, the rayon seam binding. I found through a friend of mine who contacted me on Instagram, told me, hey, I'm going to this huge estate sale in South Carolina from a closed down dressmaker shop that closed their doors in 1981.
Whoa.
So nothing is older than 1981. I was like, I'm in, let's go. So we went 2 years ago now, so 2021.
So sorry, where had it been? Like, did they just close the doors and then they didn't open them again?
Correct.
Literally, and it was all just sitting there?
Yes. Yeah.
That's bonkers.
For 40 years. Now, unfortunately, also during this time, the roof had caved in to the original building. So, like, they're not all in great shape. But, you know, it's still, most of it is still usable.
Yeah.
And so 3 years ago, all three of us, there were three of us, Haley Marie Vintage, So Drew, and myself, all went and met up with a lovely other smaller YouTuber. I don't think she does YouTube much anymore, so she doesn't really want to be named, but that's okay. But we all went through and we got amazing finds, and we all did videos and we had a great time. And I took an entire carload and an entire McCall's pattern cabinet full of patterns, and I drove in my little Scion XB back down. Like, I didn't have a truck. I literally just loaded my car full of like all this fabric and patterns.
So how did you decide to who wanted what?
I let the girls go because at the time I wasn't sewing as much. I had just started vintage sewing. And so I was like, listen, you two want to sew way more than I do. And I had made it clear from the beginning, I am here to buy as a buyer. This is not a Stephanie is going to make this.
So you let them have first pickings.
Yes. My friends got to pick first. And of course, like, you know, they were like, oh, I only want like 6 yards of this. You can have the rest. Or, you know, hey, do you care if I have that pattern too? And I was like, go. Because the thing is, like, at the time, I was not sewing. I was buying it to resell it. So I was like, we are all here together. You two actually want to sew. You two go first. I will do the rest. I will take what I can in the rest. And so they got first dibs. I took the rest. And then we just left. And I thought that, and we had talked about me coming back, maybe, but all 3 of us had linked the original estate sale in the video. And she had been inundated with emails, and she had made so many sales, and we were and that was the whole point, right? Like, we all knew that this was going to be mutually beneficial. We were going to get the really good prices. She was going to get free publicity. She was going to be able to sell more at a higher price, and we would get, you know, the AdSense revenue from our videos. Well, I hadn't heard from her, so I thought, I was like, oh, maybe she actually sold through it all. No, 2 years later, I get an email just titled fabric. I'm like, oh boy.
That's all I need to hear.
Oh boy. Okay. Where are we going with this? And I click into it because it was a different email than the one she had originally given me. Like, hey, it's me. Can we still discuss you coming down and buying everything? I'm like, oh, we're ready for that now. So after a little bit of back and forth, that's how I source now. I apparently go and buy entire effing estate sales full of sewing stuff. So yeah, that's what my garage is currently full of, and that's what we're going through.
I mean, if you've got the space, brilliant.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I don't have the space anymore. No, if anyone knows of any more estate sales, don't contact me for about 6 months.
Yeah.
Give me till June.
Wow. So it's just listing, it's photography, it's getting it up there.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
And unfortunately, because the roof had caved in and because they weren't always stored in watertight areas, unfortunately, there is also this is dangerous to people's health. I'm going to throw this away now. You know, this is dangerous to my health. This is dangerous to their health. Like, if there is a little bit of like water damage that looks like it might come out, where it's not like gross and nasty and black mold, pop it in the washing machine, let's go. But there have been some where like you just look at the bolt and you can see the water line run all the way halfway through and you can see the black mold growing on the bottom. I'm like, nope.
No one breathe that. No one breathe that. Yeah.
That's gone. That's in the trash. And the thing is, you can't care at that point. Because at that point, I know, and some people might get mad about that. No, you can save it. No, you can save it. It's vintage. I understand it's vintage. I don't think people understand how much it hurts me to throw these things away. I hate throwing things in the trash. It is not sustainable. It is not viable. But when there is an actual threat to your health that if you make it into a garment could continue to make you sick, please don't do that. Like, that's the one thing I need to portray to people. Like, if that pattern has black mold growing on it, if that fabric has black mold growing on it, please don't. Unless you were talking like the most rare 1870s original tissue pattern, the first one that was ever issued.
Yeah. Then send it to a museum or
yes!
see if I can...
That's where I was going. I was like, send it to a museum. That's your answer.
Yeah, where experts can literally wear respiration
right.
equipment.
They can have proper ventilation because your side sewing room is not proper ventilation. I promise you that 1 or 2 bolts of fabric that are so absolutely gone are no worse than the plastic that we all think we're recycling, but we're actually just putting on a barge to China and having it end up in the water. So, like, you just gotta call a spade sometimes.
I'm just gonna let it go. So, how would you suggest to store vintage fabric and vintage patterns? Because obviously it's a finite resource.
Right, it is. Cool, dry, temperature controlled.
Right.
Those are the 3. Cool, dry, temperature controlled. So do not let Grandma store her patterns in the basement. Do not let Aunt Betsy store her wedding dress in the attic. Like those are not cool, dry, and temperature controlled. And even then, stuff may happen to it.
And out of direct sunlight as well.
Yes. Yeah. Also, sorry, I just kind of assumed that, but you're right. Out of direct sunlight.
No, I think we need to like really specify.
Yes. Out of direct sunlight, because that will bleach everything. But yeah, so like, I'm just used to like basement town where like people will store things in their very damp, like my grandmother's patterns are in my cousin's basement that has a water leak and I can't do anything about it because I don't have access to it because she doesn't want to give them up.
Ugh.
So they're just going to rot. Because I literally saw mold already starting on them when I was there 12 years ago. So I was like, they're gone. It's fine. So like, and that's the other thing, like if you're just starting your journey and you see something that has some water damage, I'm talking very little water damage, sometimes it's okay. There is a possibility that it got wet, because as soon as that old paper gets wet, it's gonna leave a mark. Like, period, end of story. And that's fine. There are some that even like if I see it and it's gotten wet, but it is not mildewed or mold, I'll sell it for like $1.95 or cheaper, because like it will still take work, because now you know that that pattern has already had contact with moisture. So you're going to have to be more careful with it than you would with patterns that haven't, because that moisture is still in there. Unless like you're going to set it in a silica bath, like those little beads, those packets that you get like in your shoes.
Yeah.
Like you can dump it in that, but like there's also still no guarantee that that won't happen eventually. So that's why I'm like, if you see one that does have that, you just need to be very careful.
Then you could trace it.
Right. Trace it and then either find it a new home or just, recycle the baby. It is what it is. You just got to be careful, because like your health is more important than an old piece of paper.
Hot take.
Hot take. Your health is more important than old tissue paper. And the same with fabric. So like when you're getting started, like you might find a piece of fabric, like me, where you're like, oh, this looks like it has some water damage. Fabric, thankfully, there's two folds here. One, it can be easier to deal with, and two, it can be harder to get out. So like it just depends on how far it is. If you catch it early enough, it is sometimes just a simple wash, just to shake all the bits out that are bad for you and move on. Put a little bit of white vinegar in there to help kill whatever it is. There are other times where it is now into the fibers, and that's where you have to be careful going in from the beginning. That's why I'm trying to be very careful, especially on this big lot where like there are pieces that have some water damage. Honestly, I haven't listed them because I'm still trying to figure out how to deal with them.
Sure.
Because I don't want people to get sick from the things that I send them.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of the times what does draw people back from using vintage, because they don't know the difference and they would rather play it safe, especially if they are not perfectly healthy. My mom had breathing problems. She would never have used a vintage pattern. And it's not because she didn't want to. It's because she knows that if she goes to Joann's and buys the new version, that hasn't been sitting in mold and mildew and dust and everything.
Yeah.
And that is perfectly okay. Do I still think they're hot trash, those reproductions? Absolutely. But am I going to be mad at anyone that uses them? No! I understand people have their reasons. And that's okay. I want people to feel empowered to sew how they feel the most comfortable. And if you are immunocompromised, there was a lady who, like, bless her, she emailed me very early on in the pandemic because I was offering really big discounts on things. And she was like, hey, I'm wondering if you have any patterns that are new, because I can't bring in dusty, moldy, even just basic dust to my house. And I said, well, the only thing that I would advise is grab a PDF, because then you can print it and you can control how it's used. And that's why I love my friends that do the PDFs. I'm like, that's fantastic. Please do more of those, because you never know what people are going through.
Sorry, that's vintage patterns that have been scanned.
Yeah.
And then are accessible. Right.
To those that, are immunocompromised. Yeah, it's a lot of paper and you need to have a printer of some kind. So like there are still barriers to entry, but it's trying to lessen the barrier to entry of like, well, I'm worried about my health. My health is more important than sewing. Totally valid. Let's find a way to make it accessible. And that's why like I tell people, like, go to Mrs. Depew, go to Wearing History. They both do PDF patterns, or they do print on demand, where like they will send you a brand new printed thing. That's why like I love the PDFs, because of like that one person who took the time to email me and ask me that. And I was like, I never had thought of it. Never had thought of it. And if that person is happening to listen, thank you, because that made me rethink how I put my listings on my website. So like I try to make sure, and sometimes it falls off depending on the listing, but like I try to make sure it's very clear that while my house is absolutely smoke-free, I do have a dog, and this pattern is old and I have no idea where it's coming from. and also for this dressmaker shop, like I'm putting in there, like, this is from a closed down dressmaker shop. It is sold as is because it has been around dust and allergens and so things like that. So like, that's why I'm like, everyone needs to wash this as soon as they get anything from this lot, please and thank you.
Yeah. Well, that's all you can do, isn't it? And then people can make that decision based on their own circumstance.
Yeah.
So the thing about the fabric in particular,
Yeah.
well, and the patterns as well, is like the vintage stuff, it's finite, like that.
Yes.
That kind of stresses me out. 'Cause I work in a fabric shop part-time as well, but it is new fabric, so I can have the luxury of being like, I quite like it, but I'm going to see how my feelings develop towards it. Or, you know, I always know that there's some new fabric around the corner. Like, I know obviously you find new lots, but like the temptation just to be like, I love this, I keep this, because I might not see it again. Do you know what I mean?
It's a real thing. It's a real thing, and it's a problem.
And then once you've done the got the thing, how do you decide, like, okay, I'm gonna cut it now? Because there's no going back at that point either, is there?
And I would absolutely be lying to you if I sat here and was like, oh, you just cut into it. Nope. I have pieces of fabric that are in my collection, that have been in my collection for literal years. And because I still can't quite figure out what to do with it, I'm not cutting it. Nope. Oh man, I have this one piece of fabric that is just the most stunning thing I've ever laid my eyes on. And I just stare at it and go, what are you going to be? Because I only can make one of you. I've never seen you before, and I've never seen you since. What are you going to be? And I can't do it. I can't cut into it yet. And I have to, not you. I do. I'll put this in for, here you go, not even attacking other people. I'm going to say I have to be better about using the pretty things. Because what's the pretty thing if it's sitting on a shelf as a piece of fabric? If you're not wearing it, you're not enjoying the pretty thing. You're just staring at the pretty thing, which is very different and not sustainable at that point. Because now you're just hoarding.
I completely agree. And this is the kind of thing that I write and talk about all the time, except when it comes to vintage fabric. Like, I have got my own stash of vintage fabric. In fact, I've got some pieces here to show you because I know that you'll appreciate it. I don't know anyone in my real life, so I'll show you later. I'm not going to include that in the podcast because that's a visual thing. But I can't. I have to keep it. I can't. But I completely agree when it comes to other fabric, especially fabric that you could probably get again. Like, oh, okay, it's a piece of denim.
Yeah. Yeah,
then I'm
you
like,
can get more of that.
Please. Yeah. But when I feel I go like that when I think about the vintage.
Yeah, and it's hard. It is. I'm not even gonna lie. I have vintage sheets that I am having problems cutting into. Vintage sheets, things that would be on people's bedded, and I have problems cutting into it. But it's Kermit, and it's adorable.
No, I would have trouble.
It's Kermit with a banjo. It's killing me. Like, I'm like, it's so cute, and I want it to be a skirt so badly, but So my friend and I actually, so this is where I would say, get a buddy system.
Okay.
Find a friend. You know, maybe it's not sewing that they love, but maybe they love cooking. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to do it for content, but you need that person to encourage you to hype. You need your hype man. You need your hype person. You need your person that's going to be like, yes, do the thing. Because if you do that thing, then I'm going to do this thing that really scares me. And we're going to do awesome things together. So that for me is my friend Christina. With Love Christina is her channel on YouTube. And she is my perpetual hype person. So like, I have been having problems with these Kermit pillowcases for literally 3 years. Yeah. I can't seem to do it. And she looked at me and she's like, Stephanie, we're going to do a video about it together, you and me. I was like, okay, what are we going to do? She's like, I found a Muppet cookbook. I was like, a what now? A what?
Oh.
I need this. And so she found, it's like a little pamphlet. It's very small, but it's very cute. I was like, okay, this is cute. She's like, we're going to do videos. We're each going to make something. I'll do Miss Piggy. You do Kermit. I was like, oh crap, that's a good idea. Okay, we're going to do that. So because now I'm like, oh, we have a thing. We're going to do this thing. So now I have the like freedom, like, I can make this skirt and not have to feel bad. Like I can do the thing that I've been wanting to do for years.
And it'll be bringing a lot of joy.
Yeah. So that'll be fun too.
I'm going to show you a piece of fabric that I'm so glad that I didn't cut into.
Yeah.
Because I went through quite a rockabilly phase about 12 years ago. I was really into the late 50s, early 60s kind of sheath dress look. I was never much of a fit and flare. I just felt like too much. But I liked that silhouette with like beautiful necklines and stuff. And I nearly used this fabric to make one, and I'm glad I didn't, because obviously now I'm not that size anymore anyway, and it's not my style anymore.
Yeah.
But okay, so... And I since saw it also in an exhibition in the Fashion and Textiles Museum in London, so double glad I didn't. So it's called Nautilus. Have you seen that?
Oh my God, no. Holy crap, that's cool.
Isn't that divine? So it's a real atomic... I will put a picture of this in the show notes.
Wow.
So it's a real... Yeah, so it's called Nautilus. I can't remember who the designer is, but I think it's written on one of the selvages. And it's curtaining, and I'm so glad I didn't cut into it.
That's beautiful.
And in fact, I put a picture of it on my blog like a squillion years ago, and somebody random, some guy contacted me saying, would you sell me some of it? It's actually a few curtains, and one of them was in amazing condition, so I cut a bit of it.
Yeah.
And he bought it from me because he wanted to have... He was passionate about mid-century modern style,
nice.
And he was creating a collection. So I didn't sell it for very much, and I thought, well, he appreciates it, he wants it for the love of the print, so I did sell a bit. And my mate at the time, she was like, I can't believe you're doing that, I can't believe you're doing that, I can't believe you're doing that. And I was like, what are you talking about? It's fine. Anyway, I don't regret selling him stuff, and I'm so pleased I didn't cut into it and make a dress that I would have worn like twice and I wouldn't be able to fit in anymore.
Yeah, and that's the downside for me. Like, and that's a real stopping point for people sometimes. Like, especially like when you make something out of a cotton or out of a curtain, most of the time those don't have stretch. Those aren't going to forgive as you change. So
absolutely.
It's finding those pieces that maybe are a bit more adjustable or are a bit more forgiving. And the thing is, until you find those silhouettes or until you find that pattern that works like really well to go between sizes, I can get it. I totally get it.
I actually did a couple of podcast episodes, and I'll put the link to those in the show notes, about sewing for body changes. Mm-hmm. And I would really recommend, if anyone is interested in trying some vintage styles or using some vintage fabrics, to apply I kind of crowdsource a lot of ideas about how you can do things like making bigger seam allowances and stuff like that. I would really recommend people listen to those, because there's loads of great tips in there which might save you a bit of heartache as and when bodies change, because bodies change.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All bodies change, and it's not a failing of you. It just means you're a person in the world.
You exist on the planet, and gravity is a thing. Like,
yes, exactly. And time passes, like
correct.
Literally. We're not all like frozen because time is passing. Yeah, exactly.
Now that we've both gotten off of our high horses, like it's fine.
Okay, I have a question. So, are you worried that vintage patterns and vintage fabric are going to dry up? And do you have to redefine what vintage means, for example, to start including like 80s and 90s, for example?
I don't think they are going to dry up because of the Industrial Revolution and how prolific they were. And also, again, passage of time. You're born, you live, you die. There is no getting off this planet any other way. People will continue to pass on, and those people might have sewed, and that will bring it back. Now, will you see that one particular pattern from the 30s that is glorious and in your size readily available again? Probably not, because that was not as prolific. It would have been used more, so it would have gotten worn and through more and would have fallen apart. But I don't mind the redefinition of vintage that is occurring. Do I particularly like the fact that things that were made the year that I was born are vintage? That's a question. But it's the Etsyfication of vintage, and that just really is what it is, and it's fine. The thing is like, I definitely have Gen Z friends that absolutely are like, oh my God, Y2K is so cool. It's so trendy. And I'm like, buddy, it was a thing the first time around. Are you sure about that?
Yeah.
So I don't mind it. I will say I don't cater to it. I don't go out hunting for 80s and 90s patterns. 80s and 90s patterns just find me. Because here's the thing. In that box that your mom saved grandma's patterns in,
she stuffed her own in there.
Right. She's right in there with her patterns. They're not going to be in a different box. She didn't care that much. She just wanted all the sewing things in one spot. So you're probably going to find two 50s patterns and a whole crap load of 80s and 90s. And that's fine. So like for me, it's not something that I am hunting, but it just tends to find me.
What do you do with the 80s and 90s patterns?
Oh, I sell them if they're interesting enough.
Right. Oh, you do list them?
Yeah. As you will be, if anyone goes to my website to see, it's a lot smaller of a section because it takes a lot for me to want to list an 80s or 90s pattern, or it has to be completely factory folded so I don't have to think about it. Like there's two ends here. It's either super cool and I'm willing to check it, or it's never been touched and I...
Yes, you don't have to count the pieces and check everything's in there.
All I have to do is scan it, list it, and move on with my life. So there's two spectrums. It's either real boring or really interesting and probably has some piece missing. But I don't mind it. I don't think vintage will dry up, especially like I found 2 entire McCall's pattern cabinets full of patterns.
Did your heart go, like, did you start...
Oh, the first time I saw it, absolutely. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. That's not what I'm seeing. I was absolutely floored. But those are still out there. There's other people's other South Carolinas. There are other dressmaker shops that closed down. There was somebody that found one recently that had closed down in the 60s.
Wow.
Just totally there. And I'm like, whoa, buddy, I would have loved to find that one.
Do you know how many daydreams I've had of like going back in time into like maybe like 1962 and going to the fabric section of a department store?
I would absolutely. Oh no, I would just go to the dresses. I would just go to the dresses. I would just go to the dresses. Gimme. I'm taking them all back. Give me all the border prints, baby. I don't think it's going to dry up.
I feel like you were probably safer in this situation in North America than in some places in Europe or elsewhere because, I mean, you don't get estate sales here.
Really?
Yeah, it's not a thing. You get companies that will do clearances and then they will then, pick the most expensive bits and sell it off and then the rest might go to a flea market. I don't even know.
Oh, interesting.
It doesn't happen because I think that property is smaller. People don't hang on to things for generations.
Yeah.
It's a bigger turnover.
You don't have that much space.
No, like I'm like, and it's just my stuff, let alone my generations before me.
Right.
There's
only one reason to visit America. Everything is bigger. We keep more stuff. Like,
yeah.
You want to go dig and get dirty, this is the place to do it.
Like, generally, you don't tend to have basements in the UK, or certainly not where I live. So, and sometimes you have attics, but there's not like that whole space where typically you could store stuff.
So what you're telling me is when I come over to visit the UK eventually, I should just bring a giant box of patterns and let everyone just go to town on them.
What I'm saying is don't get your hopes up about finding some amazing job lot of patterns from the 1950s.
Understood.
In the UK.
Well, also the other thing with your country in particular is that because your wartime rationing lasted a whole lot longer than ours did, our pattern companies were able to swing back into full production by... Oh my God, I want like 48.
Right. Oh, good point.
Y'all's were what? When did the last ones? Like 55 or 56?
I don't know, but my parents were alive and children when there was still rationing, and they were born in 1950. So
I want to say yours was lifted a lot later, and so because of that, your country in particular is also not going to have a whole bunch of vintage leftovers from that time period because you weren't making them.
Yeah, amazing. So, can you give us some tips on like thrifting or sourcing secondhand or pre-loved sewing resources, like regardless of someone's like aesthetic preferences?
Sure. Okay. So if you want to sew and you go to an antique mall, right? So like there are antique malls and charity shops, right?
Charity shops, like flea markets, antique shops, yeah.
Okay. Step 1, always check the floor. That's the step 1. For some reason...
I was not expecting that.
Always, I am crawling on the floor anytime I find patterns. Like there's like boxes of patterns on the floor tucked in the back. And it's usually right next to the like stack of fabric that they have, if there is fabric. I will look up to see if like maybe they pulled 1 or 2 to be like, look at me, I have a pattern. They're usually going to pull something really expensive and they're usually going to price it really high. Don't buy that one. You look at the floor, you look at the bottom shelf, you look in a dark corner.
Or the back room.
Yes, they always hide it in a dark corner or a back room. That's where it always is. Step 2, ask the front. Because I guarantee you, for some reason, there's something, especially if there is a female or a female presenting person up front, they will know where the patterns are and which booths have them if they're in an antique shop. And they also might be like, oh, I didn't know anyone wanted those. The number of times I've heard that. They're all in the back. Let me go get them for you.
It was better than like, we put them in the bin last week.
Oh, I don't even want to talk about that.
Yeah. The amount of times I've gone into charity shops and I've asked like, oh, do you have patterns? And they're like, oh no, we use those to wrap up when people buy ceramics.
I want to die. Every time I hear that, I want to die. I want to die. Yeah. I hate it so much. Can you imagine? And I'm like, listen, if you're doing it from 1980s shorts patterns, go with God and joy.
But they're, these old things.
I opened up one that was an unprinted pattern, which meant it was minimum 1945 or older. And I'm like, I hate this. I hate this so much. I hate this so much. Who did this? And they had wrapped another pattern in it. Like, I'm like, no, you're missing the point. You're missing the entire point.
Yeah.
Like, just because you don't understand it doesn't mean that it's trash.
Yeah.
But yeah, so those are my tips. Go to the floor, ask the employees, and most of the time they'll know. Most of the time they'll know. Or, like I said, you will just be prepared to hear that statement of, oh, it got thrown in the trash last week. Oh, we just donated it, which means it got put in the trash. Don't donate your patterns. They get thrown in the trash. If you're donating your patterns, assume they're going in landfill. Find a sewing community. Find an art supply store. Because here's the thing. We have, here in the U.S., we have these art supply stores sometimes where they're like either free or cheap art supplies for people to just craft and be creative. And I will donate patterns to those, knowing full well that will probably be a collage of some kind. That was, but the thing is like at that point, if the patterns are if they're, because most of the time they're like 80s and 90s things that I don't want and also are not interesting enough for me to check, go with it because those are so mass produced. I can go onto Etsy and if I can find 50 of it on Etsy in the same size, I don't care. Go with it. If you want to collage that 1980s dress that you can find quite actually 25, 50 of on Etsy, go with it. It's not rare and it's okay. Because for the number that you see that are for sale on Etsy, there are thousands more out there somewhere. Now, the 40s and 50s, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Photocopy it and then use that. That's my thing. They're like, but I love the front cover so much. Like, oh, I understand that. There's a color copier, my friends. Don't use the real ones. Please, God, don't use the real ones.
Okay, so what about fabric? Can you give us some advice about sourcing secondhand fabric? As I say, regardless of your preferred aesthetic.
Got it. Bed sheets.
I mean, like the one you use. Sorry to interrupt, but the points you were making then about checking in terms of mold is a really good one.
Yes, you absolutely want to check for mold and mildew and water damage. Believe it or not, I don't like tears and things like that aren't the biggest thing. And there is a difference between a stain that is cleanable and a stain that is not. It is up to you whether or not you decide for yourself to take on that project. And I bring that up especially because my number one tip for starting to sew, if you're looking for fabric that is affordable and easy to find, bed sheets. It is a great way to start. There's a lot of material and a lot of times you can get it real cheap. Even the vintage stuff sometimes, like, people just are like, oh, it's a sheet. It's touched people's body. It's going to be $2.99 or whatever. That's why I say you need to learn the stains that you can clean versus learning the stains you can't. And are you willing to cut around that?
Yeah, I mean, that's an option.
Yeah, you can always cut around it. If you're making, like, a blouse or something, absolutely. But if you're doing a dress, like, are you willing to clean that stain out? Think before you buy it. Because if you do not think before you buy it, and you don't check it over and you get home and there's a big stain, now that charity shop thing is in your house and you're not going to do anything with it and it's just going to sit there. While the impetus can be to get a whole cart full of stuff with all these ideas, if you are starting, if you don't know your aesthetic, if you're just learning, if you're just getting going, start with one or two. One or two things that really excite you to make you do the thing, but don't go overboard because especially where you live and sometimes where I live, like, if you have a smaller space, don't clutter your space up.
I think that's something that people get into all the time, isn't it, with fabric stashes? They end up with this enormous fabric stash and they feel like it's this kind of sunk cost and it's not their style because they didn't really know who they were when they first started sewing, or their style has changed.
Correct.
And they've got all this fabric because they went a bit bonkers because obviously buying lovely fabric is a hobby in itself for some.
Yep.
And then they kind of feel like they can't part with it because there's the guilt and the money and all that invested, when really it's like, I want to say, now come on people, let's go to a fabric swap, let's swap it now.
Yes.
Or something.
Yeah, the one thing you gotta not fall into the sunk cost fallacy. If you have already started, if you did go and buy the cart full of fabric, you cannot stop yourself from giving it away because you wasted money on it. You have to just let it go.
Yeah. Or go to a swap because your no longer love it thing was be someone else's brand new lovely thing.
Oh, yeah.
And you can swap it for something else.
Yeah. And you have to be able to, you have to pull the trigger. That's the thing. Don't just make the pile. Don't just put it in your car. If you're in the US, like the number of people I know that have stuff in the back of their car that they're going to donate is really high. I'm one of them too. Like I just realized the other day, I was like, oh crap, I need to go to the, donate place. Just do it. Because the thing with the clutter and your fabric is the more clutter and fabric you have around you, the less likely you are to enjoy what you are doing, because all you're doing is staring at the potential projects that you haven't done, and you're guilting yourself into feeling bad about not using it. Don't do that. Pick the project, pick up the fabric, get your scissors, and go. And if you're not going to pick up the scissors, pick it up and take it to a swap.
Yeah. It's meant to be your passion. It's meant to be your enjoyment. And then if you're lumping that in with feelings of guilt and shame and frustration, then how much enjoyment are you going to be getting?
Exactly. And I know the serotonin rush was there when you bought it. I know it. I did it. I get it. But I also know that, believe it or not, there is a serotonin rush when you get rid of it. Because you go, oh my God, I have the freedom to do the other projects that I have in my space.
Yeah. And you can see the fabric that you love.
Exactly. So you have to just win in. If you're on the fence, if you're sitting there with a pile of stuff and you're guilting yourself, this is your moment. Go ahead and ask us, are you guilty? Okay, great. You can give us that guilt. Now go donate it.
I absolve you.
Yes, we absolve you of the guilt. We have nothing to do with it, but we absolve you of the guilt. There is no guilt in having a space that is functional for you. Because if you have so much fabric that you have gotten to the point that you can't function, whether it's brain function because there's too many projects, physical function if you're like my grandmother and you couldn't find the sewing machine, there was one tiny path to the sewing machine and all the rest was fabric up to the ceilings. I get it, but it's okay to get rid of it. I promise you, in this moment, go pick a piece of fabric that you're not going to use anymore. Go put it in your car. Go find a swap. Go donate it to your local charity shop that you know sells fabric. Go. Do it now. Do it right now.
That was nothing about vintage specifically, but I think that's such a good place to end because that was so positive. So please, can you tell us where can people find you?
Yes, you can find me. I am on YouTube as my name, Stephanie Canada. Yes, just like the country. No, I don't live there. I am also on Instagram as Backroom Finds, which is my business, and it's also my website where if you are looking to buy some of the vintage that I found, that is where you can find that there. It's fabrics and patterns and sewing notions and all this fun stuff.
Do you ship internationally?
I do. International shipping does not scare me. It is just more money, and you just got to be more specific. It's no big deal. And then if you are a Gen Zer and on this, I am also on TikTok if you want to go see the more casual side of me, and it's like the North Country, because Canada, like the North Country, but I've got bad jokes for days.
And that's where you can find them.
Yes, that's correct.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. It's been such a joy to talk to you. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been an absolute blast.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions, or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!